Daniel Dillon, The Perfect Alibi, written by Tane Blackadder, read by Arthur Howard. The problem with a sunny spell in our city is that it feels like a lie. After the relentless grey of winter and the haunting rain-soaked cases of the stolen memory and the shadows in the suburbs, the blue sky outside Mel's Griddle seemed artificially bright, a painted backdrop for a play that was about to take a very dark turn. The light streaming through the window felt intrusive, illuminating dust motes and the weary lines on our faces with an unforgiving clarity. Daniel sat as always, a statue of contained energy, his gaze distant. But there was a new quality to his stillness lately. The perpetual storm in his eyes had calmed to a watchful, deep current, and I knew the source of that calm was sitting right beside him. Sarah Sanderson was no longer the woman we'd rescued from a sterile incinerator room. She was a pillar of our trio, her sharp intelligence a perfect complement to Daniel's instinct and my own methodical nature. The air between them had shifted from a tense magnetic charge to something warmer, more settled. They were a unit within our unit, and their quiet understanding was the bedrock we all stood on now. The man who walked into this fragile piece was the opposite of everything our booth represented. Philip Mason was a ghost in life before anyone had even accused him of a crime. He was a small, balding man, with the perpetually nervous demeanor of a junior accountant, who's just found a decimal point in the wrong place. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit and clutched a worn leather briefcase to his chest like a shield. "Mr. Dillon," he asked, his voice reedy, I need your help. They think I killed someone." The story he spilled out was as mundane as he was. Arthur Brandt, the managing partner at the prestigious law firm where Philip worked as a mid-level document reviewer, had been found bludgeoned to death in his opulent townhouse. The murder weapon, a heavy Crystal Award statue, had Philip's fingerprints all over it. He had a motive. Brandt was a notorious bully who had passed Philip over for promotion for years. "But I didn't do it," Philip insisted, his hands trembling. "I was at home that entire night. I live alone. I ordered Chinese food. I watched a documentary on deep-sea fish and I went to bed. I never left." "The police have evidence, Mr. Mason," Daniel said, his voice flat. "Fingerprints are difficult to explain away." "That's just it." Philip's eyes widened with a desperate fervor. "I can explain it. I was in his office earlier that day. He handed me the statue to dust off, some passive-aggressive power play. My prints are there because of that. But I swear to you, on my mother's grave I was home all night. I have proof. I have—" And that's when he opened his briefcase. What he laid out on the Formica table wasn't just an alibi. It was an alibi masterpiece. It was a meticulously curated, time-stamped narrative of an utterly boring evening. A credit card receipt from Golden Dragon Delivery, timed at 7:14 p.m. A digital receipt from a streaming service for the documentary The Abyssal Plane, started at 7:45 p.m. and finished at 9:22 p.m. Logs from his building's key fob entry system showing he'd entered at 6:05 p.m. and hadn't exited until 7:15 the next morning. Even a time-stamped selfie he'd absent-mindedly taken with his cat at 10:03 p.m., the documentary playing on the TV in the background. It was perfect, impeccable, airtight. And that was the problem. I've spent my life balancing ledgers, and the one immutable law of numbers is that nothing in the real world is ever this perfectly balanced. Nature abhors a vacuum, and it despises a perfect alibi even more. Daniel's eyes met mine, and I saw the same suspicion there. This wasn't evidence. It was a stage set. Someone had carefully, painstakingly constructed a cage of innocence around Philip Mason. "We'll look into it," Daniel said, his tone giving nothing away. The investigation began not with a bang, but with a deep, quiet dive into the architecture of the lie. While Daniel used his old contacts to get a feel for the homicide investigation, learning that the cops, led by a weary but sharp detective inspector named Eva Rostova, were convinced they had their man, Sarah and I began dissecting Philip's proof. The first crack appeared almost immediately. I cross-referenced the Golden Dragon Delivery receipt with their internal logs. The order was real, the payment was processed. But when I dug into the driver's GPS tracking data, a routine part of their delivery app, There was a curious 12-minute gap in the signal right around the time of the delivery to Philip's apartment. The driver's path simply blinked out, then reappeared a few blocks away. It was a digital hiccup, the kind a sophisticated data hack could create. Sarah, meanwhile, focused on the human element. She visited Philip's apartment building, charming the superintendent into letting her see the security system logs. The key fob data was stored locally, but when she casually asked if the system had ever been serviced recently, the super mentioned a mandatory firmware update pushed through remotely by the security company just 2 days after the murder. The timing was convenient. "This isn't just an alibi," Sarah said that evening back in the booth. Her finger traced the timeline she'd drawn on a napkin. "It's a retrofit. Someone is going back and sewing up the loose threads. They're not just proving he was home, they're erasing any possibility that he wasn't." The complexity of the operation pointed away from Philip. He was a functionary, a cog. This was the work of a master clockmaker. We needed to look at who would benefit from Arthur Brandt's death. The obvious answer was his partners at the law firm, Sterling and Vine. But as I began to tunnel into the firm's finances, I hit a wall of legal obfuscation thicker than any I'd encountered, even with Etherius. It was a dead end. Until I remembered the woman. During my digging, I'd come across the name of the firm's IT director, a woman named Ilara Vance. She was a ghost in the system, brilliant and notoriously private. A deeper search revealed a troubling pattern. Her predecessor had died in a hit-and-run a year ago. The case was cold. The parallels to David Rossi, the blackmailed politician's confidant, were too stark to ignore. Ilara Vance wasn't just an employee, she was a potential witness who knew how the digital strings were pulled. I found her, after days of painstaking work, through a forgotten alumni forum for a niche programming language. I sent a carefully worded encrypted email, posing as a journalist writing about data security. To my astonishment, she agreed to meet me on the condition of absolute secrecy. We arranged to meet at a quiet public library. When I saw her, I understood her caution. Ilara Vance was a wisp of a woman, with intelligent, frightened eyes that darted around the reading room. She looked like someone who had been living with a predator in her own home. "I knew someone would come asking about Brandt eventually," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. "But not the police. They own the police." "Who owns them?" I asked, my heart pounding. "The Covenant," she said, the name dropping like a stone. "It's what the senior partners call their little club. Brandt was their front man, but he was getting greedy, reckless. He was going to bring the whole thing down." She explained that Sterling and Vine wasn't just a law firm. It was a sophisticated clearinghouse for the city's elite, a place where favors were laundered, scandals were buried, and inconvenient people were made to disappear, all under the absolute protection of attorney-client privilege. Arthur Brandt had been the public face, but the real power was the firm's president, a revered elderly statesman of the legal community named Alistair Finch. The same Alistair Finch, whose daughter, Ilara, we had rescued from the Verdant Shield. The world, it seemed, was a very small, very corrupt place. Brandt was skimming, Ilara explained, diverting funds from the Covenant's slush funds. Finch found out. The alibi for that poor sod Mason, that was my work. Finch forced me to build it. He said it was to protect the firm's reputation, but I knew it was to frame an innocent man for a murder he ordered. She was about to tell me more, to give me the digital keys to the kingdom, when her eyes widened in terror. She was looking past me toward the library entrance. "They're here," she gasped. "They followed you." I turned to see 2 large, serious-looking men in dark suits scanning the room. They hadn't spotted us yet. Ilara was frozen, a rabbit in headlights. In that moment, I wasn't Michael Nollid, the numbers man. A surge of protective fury I didn't know I possessed took over. I grabbed her arm. "This way," I hissed, and pulled her into the maze of bookshelves in the history section. We moved quickly and quietly, my mind racing. I led her to a fire exit I'd noted on my way in, my accountant's brain for once focused on escape routes instead of tax codes. We burst out into a deserted alleyway, the bright sun a shocking contrast to the dark conspiracy we'd just escaped. I didn't stop until we were 3 blocks away, hailing a cab and shoving her inside. "Go to this address," I told the driver, giving him the location of a safe house Daniel kept for emergencies. I turned to Ilara. "Stay there, don't use your phone, I'll be in touch." She looked at me, her fear now mixed with a stunned gratitude. You saved me." "We're not done yet," I said, and closed the cab door. The connection between us was forged in that frantic, silent flight. Not a romance, but a bond of shared danger and a mutual desire to see justice done. Back at Mel's, I laid it all out for Daniel and Sarah. The covenant, Alistair Finch, Ilara's confession. The mood in the booth was electric. We had the truth, but it was a truth that was legally worthless. Ilara would never testify. They'd kill her before she reached a courtroom. The digital evidence she could provide was tainted, obtained under duress. "We need them to confess," Daniel said, his eyes gleaming with a cold, focused light. "On the record, we need a sting." This is where Daniel's past life collided with our present. He made a call to Detective Inspector Eva Rostova. Their conversation was terse, filled with the shorthand of a former professional respect. He laid out the broad strokes, omitting Ilara's name for her protection. Rostova was skeptical, but the flaws we'd found in the alibi gnawed at her. She agreed to her operation, but with a caveat. It was ours to run. Her department would provide the wire, the backup, the arrest power, but we were the bait. We were the ones who had to lure the wolf into the trap. The plan was audacious. Using information from Ilara, we learned that the Covenant was nervous. Philip Mason's perfect alibi was holding, but our investigation had created ripples. They were planning a meeting to discuss the Mason situation, a meeting that would include Alistair Finch himself. The location was a private, soundproofed conference room at the exclusive members-only club downtown. Our role was to place Philip Mason in a position where he would appear to be turning state's evidence. We fed a story to a carefully selected, corruptible court clerk, a man on the Covenant's payroll, that Mason was meeting a mysterious benefactor at the club to hand over a secret ledger he'd supposedly stolen from Brandt. It was a lie, but a believable one for guilty men. The night of the sting, the air was thick with tension. Daniel, Sarah, and I were stationed in a surveillance van parked a block away, packed with Rostova and her techs. Philip Mason was our unwitting pawn, seated at the bar inside the club, a nervous wreck, but following our instructions to the letter. He was wired, every word transmitted to us. We watched on a grainy video feed as Alistair Finch, looking every inch the distinguished elder statesman, arrived with two of his most trusted partners. They disappeared into the conference room. The minutes ticked by like hours. We could hear the murmur of their voices, but nothing clear. Then the door opened. Finch himself emerged, his face a mask of cold fury. He walked straight to the bar and confronted Philip. "This ends now, Mason." Finch's voice came through the speaker, crisp and clear. "You will retract your statements. You will plead guilty to manslaughter. Your family will be taken care of. If you persist with these fantasies about a ledger, the consequences will be biblical." It was a threat, but it wasn't a confession. We needed more. That's when Sarah had her idea, a desperate, brilliant gamble. "The murder weapon," she whispered. "The award statue. Finch is too arrogant. He'll think it's a power move." She gave a signal to Rostova, who relayed it to an undercover officer inside. A moment later, the officer, posing as a club waiter, approached Finch's table carrying a small, draped object on a silver platter. "A gift from a mutual friend, sir," the officer said, placing the platter on the table. He pulled away the cloth. It was a replica of the crystal award statue that had killed Arthur Brandt. The effect was instantaneous. One of the younger partners, a man named Walsh, shot to his feet, his face white. "What is this? Is this a joke?" But Alistair Finch remained seated, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He reached out and touched the cold crystal. "A reminder, gentlemen," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "A reminder of the cost of disloyalty. Arthur thought he was untouchable. He forgot that we make the truth here. We don't abide by it. That little weasel Mason's alibi is a work of art. But if he becomes a problem, we can always create a new truth, just like we did for Brandt." In the van, we all froze. That was it. The confession, arrogant and unequivocal. "Move in," Rostova said into her radio. The arrest was swift and clinical. The look on Alistair Finch's face as he was led away in handcuffs, his empire of lies collapsing around him, was a victory more satisfying than any balance sheet I'd ever closed. In the days that followed, the city was rocked by the scandal. The Covenant was dismantled, its members facing a litany of charges. Philip Mason was exonerated, a free man, though forever haunted by how close he had come to a life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Ilara Vance, under a new identity provided by Rostova, started a new life far away, her debt to me repaid with the gift of her freedom. Back at Mel's, on a night that had finally returned to its customary comforting gloom, the three of us sat in a silence that was no longer heavy but peaceful. The case was closed. Justice, for once, felt real. Daniel was sitting closer to Sarah than usual. As she reached for her coffee, his hand covered hers on the table, not briefly but resting there. It was a simple public gesture, but in the world of Daniel Dillon it was a seismic event. She looked at him, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. The last of the walls between them had fallen. They were together. I looked at my friends, my family. The hunter had found a reason to stop hunting, if only for a moment. The heart had found its home. And the numbers man. He had, for once, helped write a story that ended with the sums finally, perfectly balancing out. The phone rang. We all looked at it. Then we looked at each other. Daniel gave Sarah's hand a final squeeze before standing up. "Dillon Investigations," he said, his voice calm and steady. The ghost was back, and we were ready.